One day, many years ago, someone got an email address that was very similar to another person's, who we'll call Man. They both had the same first initial and last name, so sometimes emails meant for Man would accidentally come to this person. These emails were usually small things like receipts or personal messages. It seemed like a simple mistake. Maybe the email address was misheard, and instead of typing gc.lastname@gmail.com, they typed g.lastname@gmail.com. When possible, this person would kindly reply to the senders, letting them know they had the wrong recipient, and asked them to inform Man about his mistake. However, this didn't stop the emails. They kept coming, including ones that seemed important, like order confirmations. The person tried to find Man on social media to tell him about the mix-up, but couldn't be sure which one was the real Man. Years passed, and then one day, an email arrived that mentioned Man's workplace. Now the person had a lead. They discovered Man was a systems manager at a company, and even found his professional email. They forwarded the misdirected email to Gman, asking him to be more careful. Gman apologized, but the problem didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. Now the person was receiving even more emails, like mailing list signups and other spam. It seemed Gman was using their email as his spam dump. Frustrated, the person decided to fight back. Whenever they got an account sign-up email, they would activate the account and then shut it down. But Gman kept signing up for more, so the person got more creative. They would change all the account details and the password, often to something like "I am a gigantic jerk," locking Man out. They also started canceling his hotel bookings right before his stay. This back and forth went on for years. Then one day, the person received an email with a receipt for an order Man had placed. It had both the recipient's and Man's addresses. It was their chance for the ultimate revenge. They used Man's address to sign him up for all kinds of free samples: adult diapers, feminine products, lube, and even odd catalogs. They spent a whole day entering his address on various websites. The most significant part of their plan involved signing Man up for countless free flooring samples. They did this over and over, to the point where they lost count. They had literally carpet-bombed Man with samples. And as a result, the emails to the wrong address finally started to decrease. They assumed Man either ignored their initial email or was too overwhelmed with the deliveries to realize his mistake. They imagined that Man might still be receiving random items at his address. Reflecting on this story, the person remembered a time during their digital design studies. They learned about different printing processes like lithography and letterpress, and were encouraged to get hands-on samples. They reached out to companies for free samples of business cards and ornate wedding cards. Once requested, these samples kept coming in the mail for years. So they understood how Man might struggle with the abundance of deliveries. The next story shifts to a lawyer's experience with a client involved in a family estate dispute. The client's brother, referred to as Sitman, was a sovereign citizen known for their unconventional legal practices. Sitman got himself joint access to their father's bank accounts, bypassing the estate process, which is frowned upon in Canada. When the lawyer demanded repayment, Sitman responded with a bogus check from a non-existent bank, filled with strange wording and conditions. The client tried to cash the check, knowing it would bounce, to avoid being suspected of fraud. As expected, the check bounced, and they sued Sitman for stealing from the estate. Sitman's defense was filled with nonsensical legal jargon and contained a significant error. He also began harassing the lawyer and their staff, leading to police interfere. In court, the judge quickly dismissed Sitman's defense, and the lawyer's client won the case. Sitman's mistake of sending the bogus check allowed the lawyer to sue him in a separate legal action for the bounced check. The two claims appeared similar but were for different issues. Later, when Sitman wanted to discuss, thinking he had a chance of winning appeal, he was unaware of the second judgment against him. The lawyer informed him that not only had they won the estate case, but also had a judgment in the bad check case, which further complicated Sitman's situation. This led to Sitman's property being tied up with legal actions, demonstrating the consequences of his actions, and the effectiveness of the lawyer's strategy. The story goes on with the lawyer telling Sitman that he better win his appeal, as he was risking his house in the process. Despite Sitman's usual outburst of anger and threats, he at last had a moment of realization. They reached a settlement where Sitman repaid all the money he took from the estate, covered all of the client's legal fees, and even paid extra for his behavior and being a sovereign citizen. Surprisingly, later that year, Sitman attended Christmas dinner at the client's house. The lawyer found it odd but understood that families can be strange and reconcile despite significant differences. However, the lawyer remained doubtful of Sitman's genuineness, but believed one could still attend family events with such a person, as long as they didn't invest too much personally. The next story is about a handyman's revenge. The handyman was working on removing turf from a backyard and transporting it to a skip across the road. While working, a building company arrived to dismantle an old pergola. They parked their truck in a way that blocked the handyman's path. When the handyman asked the driver to move the truck slightly, the driver refused, leaving the handyman with just enough space to squeeze through, making his job unnecessarily harder. Later, the handyman overheard the builders realizing they had forgotten their ladders. The handyman had 2 ladders that would have been perfect for the job, but he chose not to offer them, remembering the earlier rudeness. The builders struggled to dismantle the pergola without ladders, resorting to standing on flower pots and toolboxes, turning a 2-hour job into a 4-hour ordeal. The handyman made sure to leave his van doors open while packing up so the builders could see the ladders they could have used. The handyman felt bad for the homeowner, who paid for a service that was poorly performed due to the builder's lack of equipment. He understood why he didn't help the builders, but also recognized that it indirectly affected the homeowner. It was a situation where cooperation could have benefited everyone, but the handyman's decision to withhold help was a direct response to the builder's earlier disregard. There is another story about a kid. In a new town, there was a kid who felt a bit different because he had ADHD. He didn't know anyone yet and sometimes found it hard to fit in. He was a good kid who followed the rules. He didn't say bad words, watch shows meant for grown-ups, or do anything unsafe like using drugs. At school, he had a bit of trouble sometimes. One day, a bigger kid named Eric and his friend, who was not as tall, blamed him for saying something mean. But the kid knew he didn't do it because he hadn't even talked to Eric. The next day, he had to go to the vice principal's office because Eric said he used bad words. Even though he and his mom said it wasn't true, he still had to stay after school as a punishment. The kid felt it wasn't fair and wanted to do something about Eric, but he wasn't sure what to do. Then, one day, he forgot his locker coat at school. The office lady, who was very busy, let him see a book with everyone's locker codes. He remembered his code and also Eric's. Later, Eric's school books and backpack disappeared, and it cost a lot to replace them. The kid also took Eric's electronic device, a Palm Pilot. After this, Eric seemed worried and not as bold. He even changed his locker to a different one and didn't bother the kid anymore. Now, many years later, the kid, who is all grown up, thinks about this story from about 20 years ago. He remembers how everyone used to have PDAs before phones could do everything. There's another story about an office Christmas gift exchange called Kris Kringle. A few years ago, everyone at work bought secret presents for each other, and they were supposed to spend about £15. But Paul only got a packet of chips worth £1, which made him sad. The next year, Paul found out that Steve was the one who gave him the cheap gift. So when Paul got Steve's name for the gift exchange, he gave Steve the same kind of chips he got the year before. This story shows a funny and clever way of giving gifts at work and getting back at someone in a small way. Then there's another story about a job at a union. In this job, there was a new chairperson who took over after the old chair and vice chair left. This new chairperson acted like he was very important. One Tuesday afternoon, he did something that wasn't very nice. He took away a parking sign for people with disabilities, which was near the entrance of the building. He put up a sign that said the spot was reserved just for him. This was against the company's rules, which said only emergency vehicles and spots for people with disabilities could be reserved. The narrator, who worked late at night, saw this and decided to remove the sign that said "Reserved." He wanted to put back the sign for people with disabilities but couldn't find one. The next morning, the chairperson was upset about his missing sign. He even talked about calling the police and showed everyone a not-so-clear video as evidence. When the narrator got a text and a call about this from someone who worked with the chairperson, he talked to his boss. The boss didn't want to get too involved, but told the narrator that it was okay to talk to the chairperson about it. The boss also said the narrator wouldn't get in trouble for taking down the sign. The story continues with what happened the day after the chairperson's reserved parking sign incident. The chairperson didn't come to work that day. The management then told the narrator that they would put the handicap sign back where it belonged. The other workers who knew about what happened were really happy with what the narrator did. They clapped for him because he stood up against the chairperson's wrong actions. The narrator thought about sharing the chairperson's mean text message, which had his phone number, on the internet, on a site called Reddit. But then he realized it might be wrong to share someone's personal information like that. It could be against the website's rules, and maybe even against the law. Now there's a news story about a Christmas party. Recently, there have been some problems with how loud the parties at a hotel were. There was a person staying at the Milton Hotel for work during Christmas time. There were a lot of Christmas parties at the hotel. One evening, they went to the hotel bar for a quick drink. The party room was very noisy, but they weren't worried because their room was on the 6th floor, far away from the sound. That night, after a long day of work, they went to sleep around 1:30 a.m., but suddenly, they were woken up by loud banging that sounded like it was on their door. They quickly checked through the peephole, but didn't see anyone. Then they saw two young boys sneaking out of a room, banging on another door, and running back to their room. This happened a few times. The person was annoyed, but didn't want to get up and talk to the boys. They thought about calling the hotel reception, but then they had a smart idea. They remembered that they could call other rooms from their phone, and the hotel's app showed the room numbers. So they made a plan. The next morning, at 6:30 a.m., they woke up and got ready. They called the boys' room, pretending to be someone from the hotel reception. They used a fancy voice and told the sleepy person who answered that there was a problem with their room payment, and they needed to come to the reception right away. After making the call, the person checked out of the hotel, got a coffee, and waited to see what would happen next. 2 minutes after making the phone call, the person watched as the sleepy boys walked into the hotel reception, looking very confused. The person couldn't hear what was being said and didn't know if the boys ever realized who had called them. But they left the hotel with a big smile on their face, feeling good about their harmless trick. The next story is about someone who needed a pet sitter. About a month ago, they posted in a local Facebook group for pet sitting because they were going out of the country. A girl showed interest, so they hired her. But the person felt a bit unsure about her and kept checking in every week. Just 1 week before they had to leave, the girl stopped answering messages. With only 2 days left, the person asked a friend to take care of their pet, who thankfully agreed. The person was upset that the first girl didn't even say she couldn't do the job anymore. They told the admin of the pet sitting group, who then removed her from the group. But the person felt that wasn't enough. They found out she also did babysitting and shared what happened in a local private babysitting group on Facebook. The post started a lot of talk. Some people said it wasn't related to babysitting, but then another girl shared a similar story. She was also let down by the same girl for babysitting, which made her miss work. This caused even more discussion in the group. When the admin was removing the girl from the group, they showed the person the private messages between them and the girl who didn't show up. The girl thought it was wrong for the person to speak badly about her, but the admin agreed with the person, saying she wasn't reliable. The person tried to tell the girl how important it was to just say no if she couldn't do something. They were glad to feel like they got justice. The girl finally answered back rudely. The person was not surprised by what happened, but was happy that the group had good admins who took care of things. They thought most groups like this were often forgotten and not well managed, but they were glad to see some actually worked well. The next story is about getting back at a coworker who wouldn't listen to instructions. The person telling the story had a coworker who didn't follow the schedule, often fell asleep during work, disappeared during shifts, and liked to cause trouble. In their department, they had a tradition of putting up stockings with everyone's names on them for Christmas, and people would fill them with small gifts like candy or lotion. That year, the storyteller made little stud earrings out of resin. This particular coworker loved earrings and had a lot of them. So, for a bit of mischief, the storyteller put just one earring in her stocking, with a card that looked like the other earring had fallen off. They also didn't put their name on any of the cards, so the coworker wouldn't know who did it. The storyteller thought it was a little sneaky because the coworker might spend a lot of time looking for the other earring, but it would be nearly impossible to find it just by searching the floor at work. They wondered how far the coworker would go to find the missing earring, even checking the lost and found. The next story is about a family conflict. The storyteller's sister and her fiancé were kicking them out because the fiancé, named Kay, and the storyteller didn't get along. Kay was verbally abusive and even once threw things and hit their dog. Kay, who drove a lot and vaped, needed her license and ID with her. One day, the storyteller found Kay's license in the washer. They put it in a spot that was safe but not obvious. They tried to be nice and tell Kay about it, but she was rude. So the storyteller decided to keep it hidden and not tell her where it was. They were waiting to see what would happen when Kay needed to drive and couldn't find her license. The storyteller wondered if it was too petty to involve the police in a situation like this, like calling the non-emergency line to report a sibling for hiding an ID. The last story shared is about a hotel with a small underground parking garage. The hotel was old, and because the garage was small, parking was often a problem. On his day off, the storyteller stopped by his workplace at around 7:00 p.m. to pick up his paycheck. He parked his car in a way that partially blocked a few other cars. They could still get out, but he knew it was a bit inconvenient. As he was leaving, a group of 3 people approached one of the cars he was blocking. He offered to move his car, saying he would be quick, but could relocate if they needed him to. In a rude manner, the leader of the group told him he better move his car. The man got something from his car, but didn't move it, continuing to make rude comments as he walked away. The storyteller, feeling annoyed, decided to play a prank. He went inside, got his paycheck, and returned with 2 friends. Since it was the 1990s, the rude man's car had hubcaps. Using a tire iron, they removed all the hubcaps, took off the lug nuts, and then put the caps back on without the nuts. Being under 21, they bought a 12-pack of beer and went to a park nearby. A few hours later, they drove past the parking garage again and saw a tow truck struggling to pull the rude man's car out. The storyteller wondered if this incident happened long enough ago that there weren't security cameras. Nowadays, such an act would likely be caught on camera. The idea of removing someone's lug nuts seemed strange and risky to him. With that, the storyteller concluded the story session, suggesting that listeners check out another revenge story or his latest video for more content, promising to return next time with more stories.